Good morning, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, wherever you are joining from, whichever time zone from around the world. My name is Eran Deginige and I will be your host for today. On behalf of the London Institute of Business and Technology, LIBT, I warmly welcome you all to LIBT Exchange, the webinar series where we feature industry experts, thought leaders, and practitioners in management and technology. And today we have a very special webinar session where we talk about emotional intelligence for modern leaders. And to speak about this subject, today we have an eminent personality who is a global leader, an expert in leadership development, and a leader in his own capacity, which spans over 4 decades of experience guiding teams across Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. He has been honored with the Order of the British Empire for his exemplary leadership during his service in Iraq. He has engaged and worked with world presidents, prime ministers, chief executives, and senior leaders, all the way down to the grassroots across multiple sectors. And he's been recognized twice for pioneering groundbreaking programs and far-reaching programs, especially in Sri Lanka and in Kenya. And I have a personal connection to our speaker today because he has been one of my former leaders. A boss is not a word that he would like to be called, but we've been in the same team and I've worked under his leadership. So it's a double honor for me to be hosting this eminent personality who has, since his illustrious career, he's now spending a lot of time on developing new leaders and helping aspiring leaders to become great and better leaders in the future. And his name is Tony Reilly. Tony, thank you and welcome.
Thank you for that that long introduction, Iranda. It's great to be working with you again. I'm not sure who was the leader. We were in the same team, and as leaders know around the world, you always deliver through others. But listen, great to be here. Great to be working with you. Welcome everybody. Let me just share Iranda's welcome wherever you've dialed into from today. Looking forward to a really interesting, I hope, discussion on emotional intelligence and leadership.
Yeah. So this session is intentionally planned to be more conversational rather than a one-way presentation. This will run for about 1 hour, and you can ask your questions on whichever platform that you are joined in. We are live on YouTube, Facebook, and on LinkedIn through our LIBT platforms. So feel free to send your comments and ask your questions, and we will receive those questions, and I will perhaps collate those questions and ask and present them to Tony either throughout the program or towards the end of session. And as you all know, you will all receive a certificate of participation uh, for participating in this session. But to receive that, you will have to stay throughout the program, and there will be a form, a Google form that will be shared with you at the end of the session, and you will have about 30 minutes to fill that form with the details for us to send that certificate. So I think with those housekeeping rules, we are good to start, Tony.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, as well as welcoming everybody, I would like to kind of encourage everyone during this discussion of emotional intelligence and leadership to just reflect on, if you're a leader or an aspiring leader, reflect on your own makeup as a leader, as we discuss this idea of emotional intelligence, but also we've all had leaders, we've all worked under leaders. Also reflect on your experiences of leadership in your life, because I think that will help contextualize the discussion that Aranda and I are going to have.
Absolutely. So, Tony, this word emotions and emotional, um, you know, going back to my school days uh, as a child, as a student, we were almost taught to suppress our emotions, not to express our emotions. Expressing and being emotional was seen as a weakness almost. Uh, but then over the last maybe 20 years, this word emotions and emotional leadership and emotional quotient, it has creeped into the management books, and we see the aspect of emotional expression being a serious global phenomena in many sectors. Um, sometimes even being very political. So, but then all this time we've seen in the workplace that it was all about having knowledge in what you do, having skills in what you do, the emotion, the intelligence aspect was more prominent in the workplace and in the management books. But now we have this emotional aspect being discussed more and more, especially in the post-pandemic world. So could you tell us what is this emotional intelligence, and how does it fit with the modern workplace?
Yeah, and how does it differ from IQ,
Yeah,
which, as you said, was what it was all about when you were growing up at Moratua High School, if I remember rightly, Aranda, in Sri Lanka.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good intro. I mean, let me just say at the outset that much of what I'll be sharing today draws on the work of Daniel Goleman, who is very much the sort of guru of thinking around emotional intelligence. And in his book of that title, Emotional Intelligence, with a subtitle, Why It Can Matter More Than IQ, he makes a case for the crucial importance of emotional intelligence, and sort of defines it as the ability to recognize, understand, and manage emotions in oneself and others. And you're absolutely right, Iranda. Emotions weren't considered particularly important. It was all about, your IQ. And I guess, as an intro to the theme, the sort of difference between IQ and EQ is that IQ is all about your intellectual capabilities and your cognitive abilities, whereas EQ, emotional intelligence, is about the ability to recognize, to understand, to manage, and to influence emotions in oneself and in others. And that was the big breakthrough that Daniel Goleman made in his book, Emotional Intelligence. And it kind of makes the case for, well, stating really that IQ, of course, important, but emotional intelligence perhaps even more important in life and in work. I often refer to a quote from Albert Einstein when talking about the difference between IQ and EQ. And, you know, genius, Albert Einstein, he apparently never opted to have an IQ test. Although experts have sort of suggested that his IQ must have been in the genius range of 160 plus. And Albert Einstein had this to say about IQ or intellect. He said, we should take care not to make intellect our God. It has, of course, powerful muscles, but no personality. It cannot lead. It can only serve. And I think that's a really good kind of introduction to the difference between IQ and EQ.
Wonderful. Very, very thought-provoking. Quite deep statement there. But I think it's still a little mystery when it comes to emotions, because you know we still don't know how exactly to control our emotions. It's often something that happens to us. But I think hopefully by the end of today's session we could make some clarity on that aspect. So now our topic today is about emotional intelligence in the modern workplace. Now today's workplaces, as we know, are getting increasingly complex and almost wild, uh, especially post-pandemic. Working has been quite challenging for many people. Um, it has been a time of some significant change in the traditional practice of work, employment. As we remember, a lot of people, in fact, left work to find new prospects and different ways of working. But again, we see a lot of uncertainty when it comes to the global economy, global peace, a very, very challenging and highly dynamic, volatile time. So, what's the relevance of EQ, especially in a context like today, in the modern workplace?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. You know, I mean, you're absolutely right. The modern workplace is increasingly complex. Post-COVID, there's all the hybrid working. There's multi-generational workplaces. You know, there's the importance of equality, diversity, and inclusion in the workplace, and all of these kind of, you know, complex challenges that leaders have to navigate if you're leading in those workplaces. What Goleman sort of posed really was, it's almost a sort of hypothetical question around, if you're looking for effective leadership in these challenging workplaces, do you want a sort of very bright, you know, if in the UK you'd be talking about Oxbridge, you know, first class honors degree in mathematics. If you're in the States, you know, MIT, Yale, Harvard. I guess if you're in Sri Lanka, it would be, you know, somebody who's been at Royal College, or let's not leave Candy out, Trinity, and on to University of Colombo, or or pareidonia? Do you want, in leadership terms, a really bright person with a very high IQ, or do you look more for qualities that come from having high emotional intelligence? And what Goleman kind of suggested is that emotional intelligence trumps IQ any day of the week in terms of leadership qualities. And he talked about resonant leaders and dissonant leaders. And if I just say a little bit more about that, I mean, a resonant leader, and I'm sure the people on this webinar will identify with this. A resonant leader who has high emotional intelligence will demonstrate huge empathy. They'll be able to understand and connect emotionally with their team. They tend to foster trust and loyalty. They very often are quite inspirational as leaders, creating a sort of positive atmosphere in the workplace, motivating employees, creating a sort of shared vision for whatever the organization's purpose and mission is. And they have, because this is a key aspect of emotional intelligence, great self-awareness. They're aware of their strengths and their weaknesses as a leader, and they'll be open about that. And they're able also to regulate and control their emotions in the workplace and respond to others. A resonant leader will also emphasize collaboration and teamwork and foster creativity and innovation. Now, the opposite, the flip side, if you have lower emotional intelligence, would be you'd be a dissonant leader, not a resonant leader. So your leadership style wouldn't resonate with those around you and who you were leading. It would dissonate, and you'd lack empathy. You'd possibly be quite controlling and authoritarian as a leader. You might not have great self-awareness. You might not be aware of the impact that your leadership approach was having on those around you. You might find yourself being quite isolated. So a resonant leader with high emotional intelligence fosters engagement and collaboration. A dissonant leader can sometimes create a more negative emotional atmosphere in the office and the workplace that can hinder team performance and motivation and morale. So that was how sort of Goleman progressed the application of emotional intelligence to leadership. That's a bit of a ramble, Iranda, but I hope it made some sense.
Yeah, I mean, we hear these key words of the importance of empathy and the importance of creating a shared vision and motivating people and getting everybody on board. And there are numerous leadership theories, and in some leadership theories, this aspect is found more than in some other leadership approaches. But I want to drill you on this a bit more, Tony. You see, in my own experience, I've seen in some instances, not necessarily in sort of corporate sector organizations, but leadership at large. We sometimes see that this hard, very autocratic, um, uh, 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 unempathetic or apathetic kind of people. You might want to call them leaders, but I mean sometimes they seem to be successful in controlling some situations and bringing about change and achieving great heights. So I know we're going to get into details, but does it really matter? I mean, is it important? Is it essential to have emotional intelligence? And I would like you to sort of differentiate between sort of being emotional, having sort of emotional outlook on things and emotional intelligence, are they the same thing, or is there a difference?
Oh, it's a really good question. I think that, I mean, the answer to the first question you posed is it's incredibly important to have emotional intelligence, and some of the later research that Daniel Goleman and others have done, looking at the impact of emotional intelligence on the performance of organizations in a range of sectors, clearly confirms that high performing organizations and exemplary achievement of organizations stems primarily, the differentiating factor was leadership that was utilizing all aspects of emotional intelligence. But back to your question around emotion and drawing on emotional intelligence. It might be helpful just to sort of run through the sort of 5 core components of emotional intelligence.
Sure.
The one I think you're talking about, and I'll start kind of with you're talking about self-regulation.
Before that, before we get into sort of the details of sort of break down emotional intelligence, I would like to ask our viewers who are joining from all around the world. Tony, we have a very diverse audience today from across the globe, and that more than 100 participants are watching this on different platforms. So I would like to ask them very kindly to subscribe to our LIBT YouTube channel. Please follow us on our LinkedIn page. Please follow us on our Facebook page. And while you're at it, immediately after this, you're obviously going to look for Tony Reilly's social media channels, and you can certainly find him and follow him as well. But we will be talking about ways of engaging with Tony and us towards the end of this session. So with that plug-in, Tony, back to you. Okay, fine. So we're still trying to sort of get our head around this. We're sort of reading through the theory, but let's try to break it down. So what are some of the different components, or what are some of the different aspects of emotional intelligence?
Yeah, and that will, I think, by breaking it down, we'll get a little bit into that question you've got about emotions versus emotional intelligence. So the 5 kind of core components of emotional intelligence, according to Goleman, although in his later work he kind of reduced 5 components to 4, but he talks about, first of all, self-awareness. So leaders who recognize and understand their own emotions, and can identify and be open about their strengths and their weaknesses. I think there are lots of leaders who are aware of their strengths. They might be less aware or less willing to be open about areas of weakness, but self-awareness is the first core component of emotional intelligence. The next one, and this is where we move into the territory of controlling emotions, Iranda, is self-regulation. And that's very much about how leaders can manage and channel their own emotions and impulses in a constructive way. I think that speaks very much to your idea about how do leaders control their emotions. And in a moment, I'll kind of perhaps try and contextualize some of these core components with some examples from my own leadership journey, which might.
I think that would be really helpful, Tony. I think we should talk about some real life examples, because you have, plethora of experiences from around the world under sometimes under very severe and harsh conditions.
Yeah,
So let's hear some of those examples so that our audience can sort of relate to these
brilliant.
aspects.
Let me gallop through the other three
Sure.
components to make the five. So self-awareness, self-regulation. The next one is all about motivation. It's
Hmm.
about how emotionally intelligent leaders have a sort of passion for the work that they do that goes beyond remuneration and monetary gain, and focuses on intrinsic goals and personal growth. And with that, the fourth one is empathy, which we've talked about already, being able to understand, being able to read the room and tune in to the sort of mood music amongst their team. The fifth one is about social skills. And that's all about managing relationships, building networks, influencing those around you, team dynamics. Before we get into then some actual examples to bring these aspects of emotional intelligence to life, Iranda, another useful concept that Goleman introduces is this thing called the ripple effect of emotionally intelligent leadership, a ripple effect that these leaders can create amongst the teams that they are leading. And this is where I'm going to get into some nitty gritty and some examples. So, he talks about leaders who are emotionally intelligent almost creating an emotional contagion. So their passion for what they're doing almost becomes contagious in the workplace. They influence the emotional atmosphere of the teams that they are leading. They uplift team spirit, and can create this buzz around them. And maybe you and I, Iranda,
Yeah.
can relate that to a project that we really enjoyed delivering during my time in Sri Lanka. It was your brainchild, but together you and I motivated a team to deliver this amazing program called
Yeah.
Ideators. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you want to explain it, or do you want me to try and do it succinctly?
Well, I mean, we can both do it. I mean, I'll very quickly say how I remember it, so that
Go for it. Well,
maybe it'll
it
make,
was your baby, I think.
well, not about the not the program itself, but how I remember how the part that you explained about sort of creating this passion and buzz. So this was a television program that we ran in Sri Lanka, which was organized by the British Council in Sri Lanka, where UK university students and Sri Lankan university students were brought together, and they were given sort of enterprising tasks which they had to deliver, and there was a ultimate winner. Uh,
A
so,
bit like The Apprentice, but
a bit like The Apprentice, yeah, yeah.
but different enough for it not to get into trouble.
Yes, but it was hugely popular in Sri Lanka. We had run for 2 seasons, and that's when you joined uh, as the country director. You took over, and when you saw the program, I think you immediately realized the potential uh, of the program, where it can actually go. And then you created how I remember it is how you sort of created this amazing vision for the program, and what it can grow into and what it can bring. Uh, and and the team all of a sudden got very excited, and there were almost the entire office from different departments. Everybody wanted to be somehow part of that program. It was almost like many were envious of this project, which ultimately won the Global Staff Award for that year for the
Yes.
highest cultural relations achievement. And so I think I understand when you say that as a leader in a modern workplace with diverse people with different interests, um, the ability to create that passion and commitment and excitement uh, sort of drives success, and people almost wanting to work over time without any pay. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it is. It's the ripple effect. I think I joined actually, you'd had one season of it, and
Yeah.
then I came, and you and I sat and we said, this could be really exciting. This could be really big. We could get on, as we did, Saturday night live TV.
Prime time.
Prime time TV, Saturday night, 12 episodes. And you're right. I mean, there was a buzz in the office that we created. It was ambitious. It had risk. I kept checking in with you about the budget, and you wouldn't tell me the answers. But people gave their time and their enthusiasm very willingly. We worked 7 days a week. We had the British graduate entrepreneurs with us for 4 weeks, I think, and we had to film these 12 episodes. We were out on the road at silly o'clock, very early in the morning. We were working till late at night. Then we had our boardrooms where we were filming and gradually narrowing down till we had a winner of the program. It was an incredible time in the office, and we all shared and celebrated the success of the program. So I think that's a really good example of how emotionally intelligent leaders can create this passion and this buzz around the work of the organization. Let me go to another one quickly. It talks about emotionally intelligent leaders being able to have very good communication skills, and being able to affect the mood and touch the emotions of those around them. And I'll draw on a leader who I came in touch with through a Future Leaders program. So I was in London with a group of future leaders from around the world. And they had an opportunity to meet Nelson Mandela's elders. Nelson Mandela formed this group of very senior global leaders. And we met them in London. So young people from around the world. We were in Trafalgar Square, and Kofi Annan was the former UN Secretary General, President of Ghana. He was heading up the delegation of the elders, and he had these young people in front of him at the top of Trafalgar Square. And I remember him looking at them and talking to them and saying, he said this, he said, we, the leaders, he said, you are never, he addressed the young people and he said, you are never too young to lead, and we are never too old to learn. And I've remembered the phrase and the impact of that piece of communication that empathized with these future leaders and inspired them. And it was a great example. Later that evening at a reception, I saw him surrounded by the Kenyan future leaders. And it was clear that he had made an emotional connection to and with them. Yeah. So that's a kind of another example, I think, of what Goleman is talking about in terms of the emotional connection that leaders can make. Back to just to give one final example, Miranda, of this area of managing your emotions, what Goleman talks about as self-regulation. And he talks about crisis management. He talks about how leaders need to show enough emotion, but also control their emotions. That's where the self-regulation comes in. And I think back at my leadership career from Sri Lanka, waking up on a Saturday morning at 6:30 to get a call to say that we had a fire in the office and 7 of our 21 classrooms had burnt down. I rushed to the office in Colombo, had a quick briefing on what had happened and looked at it. I'd been on site for about 15 minutes trying to ascertain what was happening. I was then summoned to the front of the building where the fire brigade were still present, but also the television cameras. Because as you and others from Sri Lanka will know, the British Council in Colombo is an incredibly respected institution. And it was newsworthy that there'd been a major fire at the British Council. And I had to do a piece to camera. They wanted to know what was happening. And that was an example of having to self-regulate my own emotions and calm my adrenaline down. Other examples, I was 2 years in Iraq. You mentioned that. One day I'd been with a colleague to visit the Minister of Education. We left the Ministry of Education, drove past in our armored convoy the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and there was a huge explosion. It was called Black Wednesday. It was the 19th of August, 2009. I remember it like it was yesterday. And we were minutes away from a pretty bad end. I mean, there were 100 people killed in the explosion, 600 injured. Our convoy was lifted off the floor. And to then come back to the office and calm nerves, communicate what had happened, and move forward with our work was a real example of the need to control one's emotions. In Kenya, I arrived a week before the Westgate Mall terrorist attack, where 68 people lost their lives. We had staff at the shopping centre when that incident occurred. And again, we went into crisis management, and it was really important and Goldman talks about effective leaders turning challenges into opportunities, calming people down, inspiring confidence. And I think that's a really good example, Iranda, of the need to sort of manage and monitor and self-regulate your emotions. So I don't know if any of that is making sense, or if your own experiences around leadership and emotional intelligence, whether you've got any other examples you could draw on to exemplify what emotionally intelligent leadership looks like.
No, I think it makes a lot of sense. I think we made the distinction between sort of emotions and managing those emotions and regulating those emotions, and then how that fits in with the larger emotional intelligence subject of. Tony, we're getting some really interesting questions.
Let's take some
on the chat. So before we jump into the next session questions, maybe perhaps we should answer a couple of them. So Rebecca George is asking, how do leaders control emotions when in a small office, just 2 people? And it can be a very high pressure environment. So it's a very high pressure, high demanding environment, very few people. How do you how can leaders manage the emotions in such a situation?
Great question. And don't think. I mean, I said self-awareness is one of the components of emotionally intelligent leaders, and that means recognizing where you get things right, but also where you get things wrong. And I've learned as much from getting things wrong as I have from getting things right. And I worked in a really small office, very similar to the office that Rebecca's describing, when in my first leadership role, senior leadership role in Ireland. And we had a big change program going on. We were trying to make the ambition of the Ireland program much greater. We were doing some quite risky stuff around introducing what we called an Island of Ireland strategy. So there was a lot of change in the air. And I think I was very enthusiastic and ambitious about that change, probably pushing it myself, and failed to engage the very small team in that change and make them feel part of it. I don't think I listened enough. Listening is incredibly important in all sized offices and teams, but particularly in small offices. So I think I should have listened more. I should have involved and engaged the team more in the options and the changes that we were trying to bring about, the drivers for those changes. So it's about consultation, it's about listening, it's about engaging, and it's about making people feel part of the direction of travel. And also recognizing and admitting as a leader that you don't have all the answers. So I don't know if that helps a little bit, Rebecca, but I hear what you're saying about, delivery pressures, small offices, and change probably as well, which is always a difficult thing to navigate, but certainly one that's better done by emotionally intelligent leaders, I think.
Yeah, and I think it makes it doubly difficult because unlike in a large setting where there are many people who can depend on others, in a small office there's very close connection between the people. So more questions. I think we've answered some of these questions. Al-Haji Al-Hassan Sissay from Sierra Leone.
Another former colleague.
Well, there you go. You have colleagues all around the world. How emotional intelligence affect today's leaders? I think that's we've kind of covered that, and I think we can talk about it more. But I think there are some very, very interesting questions from a few colleagues, few participants, on whether there is an aspect of gender in terms of emotional intelligence. I think there's this sort of belief or understanding that women, females are more emotional or more emotionally aware. So the questions are on: is there a gender aspect to this? Are women more capable of becoming emotionally intelligent leaders? So that's one. I think this kind of leads to the next question that I wanted to ask on our session, and I think somebody has asked that very question. Quickly see. So it's. Oh yeah, there we go. Eloise S. Panton, she's asking, she's saying very informative presentation. Her question is emotional intelligence innate, or can leaders be taught how to be emotionally intelligent? I think this is that age-old
conundrum.
question, conundrum are leaders born or are leaders made, and can emotional intelligence be honed like that? Can it be
Yeah,
developed, or is it something that you are born with?
yeah. No, that's a great question, and I would like to pick that up because there's some good news there. I mean, on the gender, I mean, I think, you know, my own experience is that diverse teams are the strongest teams, and that diversity can be across genders and all sorts of other things, age, ethnicity, and the more diverse a team, the better opportunities emotionally intelligent leaders have to draw on the various talents and skills and differences that individuals bring to that team. But yeah, great question. And here's the good news. I mean, there is no doubt, you know, the research, and we'll get on to research a little bit later, I hope, if we've got time. The research does suggest that some people have naturally higher levels of emotional intelligence than others. However, the really good news, backed up by neuroscience, is that it is very possible to build, to strengthen, to cultivate emotional intelligence. So you can intentionally, as a leader, draw on various strategies and resources to build and cultivate emotional intelligence. So that's the really good news. I mean, how to do that is the $64 million question. Obviously, the first thing to do is to assess your emotional intelligence, and there are various, in the same way as there were IQ tests, there are now EQ tests and ways of assessing emotional intelligence, and they range from, you know, questionnaire type assessments that are looking at things like self-perception, self-expression, interpersonal skills, decision making, stress management. So there are some tests like that. Goldman himself, with colleagues, has developed something called the Emotional Competence Inventory, which uses 360-degree questionnaires to observe emotional intelligence competencies in a workplace context. So some people on the call, I'm sure people would be familiar with the 360-degree tool, where you get colleagues who are at the same level as you, peers, people who report to you, people who you report to observe and respond to a series of questions about your emotional intelligence and the competencies that you display. So the first thing to do is to measure, to get a baseline for what your natural level of emotional intelligence is. After that, Iranda, and to answer the viewer's question, which is a great one, is that you can do all sorts of things to strengthen your emotional intelligence. Mindfulness has become increasingly popular as a way of getting in touch with your own emotions and the here and now, and that feeds into leadership practice. Feedback, absolutely the lifeblood of personal development and growth. So actively seeking feedback on your impact as a leader is obviously a way into increasing and growing your self-awareness. Self-reflection, micro skills analysis. There's lots of ways in which you can measure yourself and the skills you bring and the attributes you bring as a leader against some sort of questionnaire. Deep listening. I've mentioned listening as a really important skill. By deep listening, we mean, you know, are you listening with your ears, with your eyes, and with your heart? Are you really tuning into those around you who you're working with? And then, of course, the big thing, and this is a plug, unashamedly, is that the increase in popularity of executive coaching, one-to-one or in a group context. That's where all of this stuff can come together. An executive coach working with a leader can tap into all of these ways of encouraging that leader to cultivate and strengthen and grow their emotional intelligence. So they are,
fantastic.
The good news is that
it can be done.
All of us can cultivate and strengthen our emotional intelligence and then deploy it to good effect with our teams.
Wonderful. We're getting a lot of questions on sort of application of emotional intelligence and some of the systems and tools and techniques that you mentioned. And I think we don't have time to get into details of all of that. But I think the point of this session, one of the objectives of this session, is to demonstrate the depth and breadth of this subject and how it has grown over the last 10, 20 years, and the importance of sort of executive coaching, which I think is now mainstream, Tony. I mean, it's
absolutely, yeah, and it plays very much to supporting leaders, no matter how senior they are. I have an executive coach who I met 24 years ago, and it's coaching can be a tremendous support for all the things that we're talking about today. And the reason why we can do something about cultivating emotional intelligence and deploying it in our leadership is it's backed up by science now, and it's neuroscience. In the same way as we understand how the heart works and we understand how the kidneys and the liver and the lungs work, we now understand how the brain works. And there's a lot of research to support the importance of emotional intelligence. Would it be helpful for me just to touch on a little bit of it?
I think that's probably the last part that we want to touch on, because sometimes these things that we talk, if they're not sort of backed by actual science, it doesn't make much sense to a lot of people. So I would like to sort of drill you on the neuroscience aspect of it, which is of particular interest to me as well. But I think there are. Shall we have a look at a couple more questions?
Go for it.
The questions keep coming, so we might have to spend a bit more time than 1 hour to answer as many questions as possible. So Joey Baker Gibson is asking, how can leaders leverage emotional intelligence to enhance employees' well-being and mental health, especially in the face of growing workplace stress? And related to that, there's another question. How can emotional intelligence eradicate dark side and toxic leadership? I think it's more of a sort of a self awareness kind of question.
Let me take those.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, the first one's hugely important, and empathy is one of the core components of emotionally intelligent leadership, and that plays into well-being issues. I think leaders need to learn how to pick up on issues of well-being in the workplace, and they need to practice listening and accepting and walking in the shoes of and bearing witness to the issues that staff are facing, that their colleagues are going through. So emotional intelligence can be and should be a huge asset in terms of, first of all, detecting and picking up on well-being issues and making them a a core part of your role as a leader and a supporter of those around you, including the skills necessary to support somebody who is going through well-being issues. So yeah, I mean, really, really important. The second one speaks almost to I talked at the beginning about the resonant leader. Well, the dissonant leader can engender what we often refer to as sort of toxic atmospheres in the workplace, because they're not tuned into the emotions of those around them. They are perhaps oblivious to them. They're unaware of the impact of their own behavior as a leader, which, you know, sometimes comes from the pressures of delivery, of budgets, of, you know, programmatic deadlines, etc., etc. So I think, you know, the opposite of emotionally intelligent leadership can engender the sort of toxic atmosphere that the question and the workplace stress that does occur in workplaces.
Fantastic. The questions keep coming, but I think in the interest of time, let's touch on the neuroscience aspect of this, Tony. So convince us that what we're talking is not just things up in the air.
It's not things up in the air. There's a bit of your brain called the amygdala, and that's the part of your brain that plays a crucial role in emotional intelligence. It recognizes emotional cues in others, and it enables you to respond to the emotions of other people. The other part of the brain that's really important, and it's the decision-making part of the brain, is the prefrontal cortex. And neuroscience has shown us that people who have a connection between the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex, that enables decision-making to take account of emotions. So that's one thing. Neuroscience, I mean, you know, we could go on for a long time, but another really important finding is the presence of something called mirror neurons. And these are neurons in the brain that play a key role in empathy. When people observe someone else's emotions, these neurons, these mirror neurons, activate similarly in our brains. And that's how empathy occurs. And then the third concept from neuroscience, which everybody is aware of now, is this concept of neuroplasticity, that the way your brain is wired is not fixed and permanent, that we can, and we know this from, you know, studies of habit formation, we can rewire our brains so that you respond to stimulus and stimuli differently, and you learn and embed new neural pathways that allow you to become a more emotionally intelligent leader. And then the final bit of neuroscience is around how the bit of the brain that regulates emotion, and we've talked a lot today about the importance of managing and controlling and directing emotion, and that's the kind of the part of the brain, the parasympathetic part of the brain that controls and adapts to and enables you to navigate emotional landscapes more effectively. So there's a lot of science out there, neuroscience, that supports how the brain operates when it's being emotionally intelligent, but also supports the things we can do to embed these, to rewire the brain and embed new neural pathways that create emotionally intelligent leaders and bring you more in tune with emotions that lead eventually to better decision making.
Fantastic. So I think we should have future sessions sort of focusing on these different aspects of emotional intelligence. Excuse me. But I think it's time for us to wrap up. Let's try to wrap up by answering some of the questions. Maybe we'll take about another 2-3 minutes maximum. So you might have to be very quick in your answers, Tony. Very brief.
I have to self-regulate my emotion now because I'm feeling under pressure.
But some questions are very tricky and they're very sort of they're very practical situations. So I think maybe you can sort of give I know being part of a coach, a job of a coach is not to give answers.
Correct.
But sometimes maybe we can relate to some of our own experiences so that people can make sense. So Nine Chan Ong is asking, how can we communicate with the leaders who does not have enough EQ?
Well, upward feedback is one way, sensitively handled. Leaders should be seeking feedback. They don't always, but it's finding, you can use your own emotional intelligence as a colleague to find a way of giving upward feedback to your managers, but do it in an emotionally intelligent way.
So it's almost like
managing
if
your manager.
You have the emotional intelligence. Yeah, if you have the emotional intelligence,
you'll find
to understand that the other person does not have the same level of emotional control as you. That itself is you have already won half the battle, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And actually, the other top tip would be see that manager as a client. Yeah. Focus on them as a client who has perhaps needs and fears and apprehensions and blind spots, and see your role as helping them using your emotional intelligence.
Great. So Tanisha Myers Ferguson, she's asking 2 questions. So let me pose both of them. They're related. How do team members relate to leaders who choose not to communicate with team members? How do team members relate to supervisors who do not share valuable information? And there was another question kind of related to this. It's like, how do we use emotional intelligence with a person who is found to be sort of lying and being, spreading falsehoods? So these are very practical workplace scenarios, Tony.
They are. I run a program. Well, I facilitate a program called client-centered consulting or coaching, and we practice the skill of confronting sometimes, which is a very it doesn't have to be an aggressive strategy. You can quite gently and deftly point out to somebody that on the one hand, you say the values of our organization are X, Y, and Z. But on the other hand, I've just observed that this and this and this has happened. And then you leave it with the person. So confronting is one way in which you might choose. It's a bit of a high risk strategy to contrast what somebody says or believes or professes to believe with their actions. That might be one way that you could do it. The other area that speaks to emotional intelligence is this whole business of vulnerability, this whole business of people opening up. And again, there's a bit of a contagion phenomena with that, that if somebody is brave enough to open up, you will often see that by taking that first step and creating what we call the sort of psychological sort of safety, permission for others to also open up. So sometimes somebody has to make the first step in opening up and being vulnerable. But once you have done, it can, people follow suit.
Exactly. This kind of reminds me similar situations that you and I had as the employer and the employee. But we don't have time to dwell into those wonderful memories. So to conclude, Tony, we've had a vibrant and very engaging audience with us who stood with us throughout the program. So please remember that you will all receive uh, a Google form, which you will have to fill in within 15 minutes from the end of this webinar in order for you to receive your certificate of participation, which can be directly uploaded to LinkedIn, etc. So to conclude, Tony, uh, if you have any words of wisdom with your years of experience organizations and in different parts of the world with diverse teams. What words of wisdom that you would like to give to the professionals and the leaders and future leaders and aspiring leaders who are listening today?
Yeah, I mean, listening is one of the things that my coach training and moving into the consultancy space is a hugely underestimated skill for people to master, listening. But I guess, and I'm not really into dispensing wisdom. I think people are resourceful enough to kind of work these things out for themselves. But I think what we've been covering today is just the huge importance of emotional intelligence in leadership and in life. It's what enables us to have more authentic connections. It has a massive impact on team collaboration. It can empower individuals. It promotes resilience, and it can play a role in inspiring trust and loyalty and a passion for what teams are doing. And as you said in your intro, Iranda, workplaces are becoming more rather than less complex, and that makes an even stronger case for people to reflect on their their EI competencies and take steps to strengthen and cultivate them. Be more empathetic, be more self-aware, get in touch with your emotions, learn how to control and channel them. Control doesn't mean never showing emotion. That's not the sort of control, but monitor, channel, and make good use. It's so important in life and in work.
Fantastic. All right. I think with that wonderful advice, we can conclude today's webinar, Emotional Intelligence in Modern Workplace. If you would like to get our expert speaker today, Tony Reilly, you can visit his website, Tony Reilly executivecoaching.com, and you can contact him personally and perhaps explore opportunities of leadership coaching, either in groups or individually. And LIBT, as you all know, we are a global educational organization. that specializes in corporate training, including leadership and executive training. So there will be future programs where Tony Reilly will be our resource person. So watch for that. And once again, I thank you all for joining today. Thank you very much, Tony, for this wonderful session, a very lively session. It was an eye-opener for many of us. And on behalf of LIBT, we thank everybody for joining today. And this video will be available to watch through our platforms, and parts of it will also be available on different platforms. So thank you very much. Good afternoon.
Thank
Good
you.
evening.
Thanks to LIBT, and thank you all for joining and listening. Thank you.